Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thanks a lot for coming on tonight. And I just want to thank everyone for coming to this public forum on human trafficking. I also want to just thank Mayor Marquez Simula, Councilmember Biskins, and Councilmember Jacobs, as well as County Commissioner Mandy Meisner for attending as well. I really appreciate that. That's great to see our elected leadership attending as well. And then also, I just want to mention too, our city manager Kelly Bourgeois is also attending the meeting too. So thanks, Kelly, for attending as well. Um, so just as a reminder, this forum is being hosted by the police department's multicultural advisory committee, and we've got several guest speakers tonight. So and I really think you're going to learn a lot about this critical issue. Before I turn it over to Sergeant Fletcher, though, I just want to thank Rachel James and Laura Newton of our MAC for all the work that they did on this event and putting it all together. They put a lot of time and effort into this, and I just want to thank you for all of the work behind the scenes that you did to make this possible. So thank you very much for that. And then also, just so everyone knows, this forum is going to be recorded, and we'll be posting it on social media in the next few days. I know it sounds like there's quite a few that were unable to attend tonight, so we will be putting it out on our social media page so that people can watch it at a later time. We'll go ahead and take questions at the end. So please feel free to submit questions via chat, and we'll get through them at the end of the presentations, or at the end of tonight's presentations. So with that, Justin, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so we can get started.
Thanks, Chief, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. This is our first public forum, so hope everything goes smoothly. But we really appreciate the great outcome we've already had today. So I again want to thank Laura and Rachel for everything they've done as part of our multicultural advisory committee to getting this started. We do have 4 speakers tonight. First is going to be Mike Shanson. He's a detective with the Anoka County Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigative Division. He works sex trafficking with the BCA, and he'll go into what he does. We also have Heidi Kopishki, and I'm sorry if I slaughtered these names, but we have Heidi Kopishki from Alexandra House. We have Lauren Newton, who is the Family Services Program Director at the Minneapolis American Indian Center. And finally, we have Bukala Oriola of the Anyton Story, coming to share their stories and what they do now to combat sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So we will get to them right away. I just want to remind everyone, like Chief said, this is recorded. So we'll share it on our city website and social media as much as we can afterwards. But recognize that when asking a question, if you want to do it in person or over your microphone, we welcome that. But it might be easier just to send us the questions via chat. And if you want to keep those private, please send them to Rachel James or myself, Columbia Heights or Rachel James, and we will ask them after everyone's gone through their speech. So without further ado, Mike, I'll give you the floor. Oh, you're still muted there.
Hey, there we go. Make sure I get my screen shared here. So I'll just do a quick introduction just about who I am here. So Mike Shanson with the Anoka County Sheriff's Office. I have worked for them for, I guess it's been about 18 years now. 6 of those years were as a deputy. In the last 10, I've been a detective. Before that, I was a community service officer. I had been a task force officer with Homeland Security Investigations, so at the federal level for 3 years, and then currently a task force officer with the Minnesota Human Trafficking Investigators Task Force. So it's run by the BCA. We got BCA agents, Anoka County, Hennepin County, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then Homeland Security Investigations are part of that task force. So just a quick background of who I am here. I'm going to kind of rush through this. A lot of times when I give even this kind of basic presentation, it takes me 40 minutes to get through. So I did cut some things out, and this is just kind of a high level overview. We'll talk first about sex trafficking and then labor trafficking. And then I'm also going to get into a real brief case study with a labor trafficking case we actually had in Columbia Heights. So kind of start off, what is sex trafficking? It's essentially modern day slavery. Traffickers not always, but frequently utilize force, fraud, coercion to lure their victims into the exploitation. forcing the victims to perform sexual acts in exchange for money or other items of value. I mean, we see things, can be exchanged for places to stay. It can be drugs, it can be other property, but mostly we are seeing, cash or things like that. Um, just to kind of let people know, what else is sex trafficking under our statute. If there's transportation for the purposes of prostitution, that can constitute trafficking. The people that are driving them to and from dates. If they house victims, rent rooms for the purposes of prostitution, receiving profits of prostitution, the recruitment for prostitution, or soliciting customers. The receiving profits is actually one of the parts of the statute we use quite a bit. We'll use it for massage parlor type businesses that are engaged in sex trafficking to go after the owners, even if they're not involved in the day to day. They're receiving the profits, they know what's going on. And even our traditional traffickers or pimps, as they're commonly called, sometimes they're not present at the scene or with the victim, but we can show that money trail that they're profiting off of it. So it's kind of what we look at when we're doing our investigations related to sex trafficking. One thing I just want to touch on, a great thing that Minnesota has done. So they created the safe harbor laws, and I believe it was August of 2011 that they went into effect. But basically, the law was changed so that youth under 18 are not handled as like delinquent children or criminals for any conduct that they're engaged in related to prostitution, sex trafficking, and they're seen and treated as a victim or a survivor, not a criminal, which this has been big. At least in Anoka County, we also, expand this as far as how we're treating these cases. Or even if the victims are adults, we look at them as a victim or survivor versus a criminal, because that's usually the case. I mean, there's a reason that they're doing what they're doing. I mean, even if they won't tell us that they're involved in trafficking or that there is a trafficker, we still treat them as victims. The safe harbor laws also make resources available for victims that are 24 and younger, and then also set up a system of regional navigators. I reach out to them a lot. They are kind of the one-stop shop for services. So if we're dealing with a victim, we need shelter, we need mental health resources, things like that. We can call a regional navigator, and I forget the exact number of them throughout the state, but I can find the navigator in that region. We have sometimes a victim that maybe is recovered in Minneapolis or recovered in Coon Rapids, wherever it may be, but maybe they're from Duluth or they're from Bemidji, where we can then find them services close to home. So we use them tons. Also, I use, especially in Anoka County, a lot. I abuse Heidi. You'll hear from her at the Alexander House. Anytime I have victims in this area, get the Alexander House to help me out. And they've been great with our sex trafficking victims. And I mean, this is going on, right here in our county. We've had a lot of cases that, even if they didn't occur in our county, they've got connections. The girls or boys, women, men who are being trafficked, live in our community, even if it's maybe occurring in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, things like that. They have ties to Anoka County. We've had both adult and child sex trafficking cases. We charge them both in our local state court in Anoka County, as well as federal court. And it's really going on everywhere. I mean, we see it hotels, motels, private residences, massage parlors, even sometimes in public places. But even when it's occurring in these public places, I mean, it's kind of one of those hidden in plain sight that people aren't recognizing that this is what's going on in their community. And it's difficult to identify. A lot of the victims don't self-report. So it's hard sometimes to get involved and to stop the trafficking. Just to give kind of people an understanding of what's the driving factors in trafficking. Really, it's the greed, the money, and then the last part is power. It's a lot like we see of narcotics trafficking, where you get the supply demand. The drug dealers are there to supply the demand of drugs. In this case, the traffickers are there to provide the supply of either women, boys, to the demand, which are the sex buyers. So we have kind of a two-pronged approach when we're dealing with this problem. One is, trying to go after the traffickers, trying to rescue and protect the victims, but then also go after the demand side of this to try and at least slow the demand, which can be difficult. Um, I also want to bring up, and I usually have a whole section of this that I kind of go into about, what can we do to try and, identify victims. There's so many different factors, and it just takes too long to get into. But one of the things they'll bring up, what we see as our at-risk populations, are the kids that are habitually running away, previous sexual abuse victims, have problems in their home, drug or alcohol addiction. Our special education students are lower functioning, and also have had previous social services involvement. That's something in most of our child sex trafficking cases. There's been some child protection or social services involvement already with these kids. The traffickers know what they're looking for. They find our vulnerable youth, our vulnerable women and men, and they go after them. I'll kind of quick touch again, on this culture and in kind of the way they get into it. The first step in trafficking, is obviously they have to find their victims. It's the recruitment. We're seeing this, happening. It could be at public places, it could be at parties, it could be at school. We're also seeing a lot online. The thing with these, especially the teens nowadays, is that they post everything on social media. If they're having a bad day, they hate their family, they're breaking up with their boyfriend, they have low self-esteem, they're putting that stuff on Facebook, on Instagram, Snapchat. Where the traffickers find them, they find these easy targets and they'll exploit them. I would say in a large amount of the cases that I've worked with, mainly teenage females, there's been a lot of the recruitment that's happening on social media. Once they've recruited them, what we usually see is kind of this retention phase and breaking them in, and then trying to keep them in and getting them into this cycle. A lot of the cases, it can be the exposure to the life. A lot of times it's showing them that it's like a lavish lifestyle. It's taking them maybe to nice places, taking them to go out to eat, taking them to get their hair done, their nails done, buying new clothes, but then also exposing them to the life of commercial sex. This is also a period where sometimes the coercion, the threats, the violence will start to try and keep them around. And then once they know they've got them, that's when the exploitation for the commercial sex occurs. I'll talk a little bit about what are we doing here in Anoka County. We used to have two detectives that both kind of worked part-time. It was myself and my partner, Detective Straczynski, that both worked trafficking in Anoka County. Once the Human Trafficking Investigators Task Force was created in 2018, I believe it was, that's when we decided to dedicate one person full-time, where that's all we're working is trafficking. So it was first Detective Straczynski, and then he decided to transition to a different assignment. And then I took over in his position down at the Minnesota BCA. With that, and even previous to the task force, we work on reactive and proactive investigations. Our reactive is we receive a report. A lot of times it's just receiving tips of activity that's going on. Infrequently, we do get reports from victims, but a lot of times they're not coming forward to report what's going on. And then as far as the proactive investigations, that's doing like victim recovery operations where we will, scour advertisements online or on social media, mainly focusing, first on recovering juveniles who may be advertised for commercial sex, but also adults. With those operations, that's a lot of times where we uncover that, this person is being trafficked, who the trafficker is, and we can make arrests of a trafficker. We do the victim recovery operations. We usually have an advocate, whether it's from the Alexander House or one of the other service providers with us. So once we recover the victim and they come to whatever location we're at, we then connect them right away with an advocate in hopes that they can talk with them, they can offer them services, and try and assist them in getting out of the lifestyle or away from the trafficker, even if they're not ready to speak to law enforcement about it. The advocates have the opportunity to speak with them in a confidential environment where they can tell the advocate what's going on, try and get them help without having to go forward with an investigation involving law enforcement. On the demand side of things, going after the sex buyers, We do a lot of what's called a juvenile demand, and then occasionally traditional John stings. The juvenile demand, essentially, we're offering up a juvenile for commercial sex or sex for money. In fact, last weekend, some of you may have seen, I think some of the news stations picked it up, but our task force was up in Grand Rapids. While we were up there, we arrested it was 6 or 7 people in 2 days who were coming to our location to have sex with a 15-year-old girl. It was going to be in exchange for money. So those are all felony level cases. Also, we want to go after them because these are the worst of the worst. They're going after buying, sex from our children. We had one guy that actually expressed in his interview that he was excited to go purchase sex and be with a 15-year-old girl. So these are the ones that we want to put in jail, the ones who want to get charged. Unfortunately, if we did just the John stings of somebody who's willing to pay for sex with an adult, we could probably, if we had enough manpower, we could probably make 50 arrests a day. We put these ads online, and we get these messages coming in, and it's hundreds and hundreds of messages that are flowing in. We frankly just don't have the resources to be able to work those. So that's again why we're focusing on the ones who are taking advantage of juveniles. We also do education, hotel, motel, staff, public education forums. We talk to school staff, advocates, other community groups. Frequently do presentations like this. It's usually not over Zoom. Usually we're going out to these events, but unfortunately we can't do that right now. So that's kind of it. That's a real quick synopsis of the sex trafficking. And then we will transition here into talking a little bit about labor trafficking. Again, labor trafficking is, a modern day version of slavery. The main things with labor trafficking are the types of offenses it includes would be debt bondage, forced labor, involuntary child labor. Most of the ones that we see are the debt bondage or forced labor right now in Minnesota. And just because this ties back, right to our community here in Columbia Heights, I wanted to go over a case study. Usually I also do one, a local case for sex trafficking as well, but just due to time, we're not able to do that. So the case that I'll talk about here involves the Royal Orchid Thai restaurant that used to be down right off of Central here down in Heights. The owner of that or person involved is a Pisanu Tikirog. These are just the charges that he had faced, and I'll kind of quick get into the case here. But he was charged in Anoka County District Court with criminal sexual conduct in the 3rd degree and labor trafficking. In federal court, he was charged with forced labor, aiding and abetting visa fraud, and harboring certain aliens. And just to kind of set the tone here, there's a lot of sensitive stuff in this. The victim I've talked to at length. He wants his story shared. He's given me permission, to share his story. I still talk to him, at least once a month. He's struggling after all this had happened, but wants to make sure that his story is out there and others know, what happened to him, in hopes that it can potentially, help other victims come forward or help people recognize the trafficking. So how this case started, on July 21st of 2017, the victim actually had called the National Human Trafficking Hotline and had made a report. This kind of gets filtered down. Eventually it made it to me because I'm in Anoka County. I had received it, I think it was like late at night. And so the next day I was able to make arrangements to speak with him. What he told me was that, and I'm just going to call him Mr. Pat, is Pisanu Saptikirog, just because his last name is cumbersome to keep saying here. But Mr. Pat had traveled to the Dominican Republic, and he had befriended AM, who's our victim, his family when he was a juvenile. Once he was 18, Mr. Pat then made arrangements or started making arrangements to try and get AM to come to the U.S. The original plan, or what he was told, was that he would help him attend high school. He would pay for everything. So he coached him in how to obtain his F1 student visa, including, how to lie about things and not talk about him owning a restaurant. And then this trip was just all about him being able to finish his high school education in the U.S. So this all comes together. He gets his visa. I believe I think it was September of 2015 was when AM arrived here. He was allowed to attend high school, but just for a short period of time, and it was for like English as a second language type classes. Um, Pretty soon after AM got to the United States, Mr. Pat began to engage in non-consensual sexual acts with him. Um, he stopped paying for him to go to school and to these English as a second language classes. And once he stopped going to school, then his student visa was no longer valid. So he was then now in the US illegally. So Mr. Pat ended up putting AM to work in his restaurant in the Royal Orchid. Um, he had withheld pay. Basically, what he told him was that he had to pay for his flight, he had to pay for the visa costs, he had to pay for the food he was eating. So essentially, racking up this bill and turning this into a debt bonded situation. Um, he was working more than 40 hours a week, and he was getting about 125 bucks a month. Um, he had initially been living at Mr. Pat's house, um, but then was kicked out of the home. And I think, as Mr. Pat put it, he was allowed to live in this storage room, which is this bottom photo of this dingy storage room that had like one lamp. That's where he lived in the basement of the restaurant. And clearly, nobody knew he was there, other than those in the restaurant. Throughout this, AM was continually subjected to threats of deportation, being kicked out of the house, or having any type of support if he would not engage in doing sexual acts with Mr. Pat. And that was the big piece of coercion that basically kept this victimization going, is that he knew nobody in the U.S. He wouldn't be able to have a place to live. He didn't know how to support himself. He didn't know of the resources that would be available to him. And so this went on for almost 2 years. It was once he really learned that this is wrong, he can't do this, and began to research things that he stumbled across the human trafficking hotline, which is where he eventually called and made his report. Um, so once this was reported, we actually partnered right away with Homeland Security Investigations, knowing that this would be potentially a federal case. It was great because they helped step in and get what's called continued presence, which then allowed him to be in the country legally. We were able to get him shelter, get him connected with mental health services, and it was great. I mean, we had victim advocates, not only our regional navigator, some people from the Tubman shelter, but also the Homeland Security Investigations victim advocate worked with him on like a daily basis. And so he had also worked at the International Institute, Advocates for Human Rights, and then was able to get connected as well with an immigration lawyer to kind of help him with his legal status in the U.S. And eventually he was able to get what's called a T visa, which that's a visa that allows victims of trafficking or serious forms of trafficking to remain in the United States. And with that, they also are able to get work authorization so that they can legally work and support themselves while in the U.S. He was connected with a therapist due to, just severe mental health issues that he had after this, almost 2 year period of victimization. I can tell you he still struggles daily. I get calls, sometimes late at night when he's having issues, and we're trying to help him through things. And I know I'm not the only one in our group of investigators that get these calls. So it's been a struggle, even with all the services that we've been able to find and get provided to him. It's still been difficult. Um, Kind of our final disposition on things. Mr. Pat pled guilty to aiding and abetting visa fraud and harboring aliens, and he was sentenced to 42 months in federal prison. We did have to have the victim testify in the sentencing portion because there's a large amount of restitution that was being sought for all his unpaid wages, and the suspect, or Mr. Pat, was fighting this. His defense attorney was horrible and just absolutely grueling and inappropriate cross-examination that was allowed to go on that really set back his mental health a long ways and was difficult to get through. And it's something that we don't like to do. we avoided the trial by they made an agreement to drop a couple of the federal charges, so we wouldn't have to do a trial, but you still had to testify, which is very difficult. So this kind of leads into what happened in the state court. He was charged with criminal sexual conduct for all the things that had happened. However, there's a problem in the definition of coercion with our state statute, and the threats of deportation, loss of financial means, loss of housing. The court did not feel met our definition of coercion. The judge actually in the case wrote a good order, and basically you could tell she did not want to dismiss the criminal sexual conduct charge, but basically said because of the way our statute is written, I have no choice. This does not fit the legal definition. So we've been working with some lobbying groups to hopefully get some of that language changed to protect these people. But what we had left was one count of labor trafficking, and with that and with the issue of the victim potentially having to testify, we actually we talked to his counselor, some of the advocates, and kind of determined it wasn't in his best interest, and there wasn't going to be probably any additional prison time or any additional restitution that could be gained. So in the end, they did dismiss that case, which was difficult, but it was one of those things that was kind of in his best interest. So that's that. I know I really kind of rushed through things, and I think I still went a little bit long. If anybody has any questions about sex trafficking or labor trafficking, there's my 2 office numbers. I'm between the sheriff's office and the BCA, and my emails as well. So feel free to reach out. And thank you guys all for coming, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike. We appreciate that a lot. Obviously, he does great work, and we work closely with CID. Whenever we hear of anything going on, we call CID immediately. Next, we'll go with Heidi Kapishke from the Alexandra House. Heidi, thank you. And I can share, or you can share if you are comfortable.
Oh, yep, I can share it. I have it right up.
Okay, perfect.
If I can get it. There we go. Okay, so my name is Heidi Kapishke. I'm the Shelter and Supportive Services Coordinator at Alexandra House. I have been there over 17 years and worked in pretty much every position there. And I just want to go over the basic services that Alexandra House offers, because we work with survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and trafficking. So that's where we kind of tie into this. And we are located in Blaine, our shelters in Blaine, and our legal advocates and our community advocates are located in Anoka. So we do serve primarily Anoka County, but right now in our shelter, we have people from all over the place. With COVID, the counts have been kind of weird. We used to stuff as many people as we could in a room, and we'd use our extra rooms for space. And now we're only putting one person or family per room. So it's a lot quieter in some aspects, but there's a lot more work to be done because of COVID. It's a lot harder to receive those services. So we'll start off. This is just our mission. It's to empower victims of domestic and sexual violence and inspire social change through our support and our education and advocacy. Oh, that was just about me. Told you everything I do. And working with the sheriff's office, they give us a call anytime they're doing their stings or anything like that, and we can support the victims through a myriad of services. Plus, I've been working really closely with the new navigator for our county for the East Metro, who works with young adults 25 and under who are being trafficked or exploited. She was new to the position, so she's been looking for some other resources in our county, and so we've been getting her hooked up. So she's been calling me quite a few times when she's come across some potential kids that are being exploited or trafficked. So just to let you know a little bit more about what we do at Alexandra House. We're a refuge and a lifeline. We have a shelter, like I said, and that's for women and women with children, and male victims we do house separately at another location. We have a 24-hour emergency line for anyone to call. That can be victims. It can be people in the community looking for help for others, people looking for any sort of resources. That's why we're there. We don't have our numbers updated for 2020 yet, and they'd be kind of unique. But into 2019, if you can see right there, we housed 453 women and children, and the total was over 13,000 nights of safety. And that call number there, the 3,800 calls answered on our crisis line, that is way low because the only way we know or we have a count for calls is if we log it in a phone log system. And I can tell you honestly, I don't get every call log, so I know that we have way more calls than that. And our average stay at the shelter in 2019 was 30 days. And right now, also, it's a lot more, just mainly because people coming in have so many more barriers and because of COVID, too. We also have our community program. Like I mentioned, our community office is in Anoka, and it houses legal advocates, youth advocates, and our healthcare advocate. And we'll touch on what each one does. The community program that we first talk about is our support groups. Our support groups were non-existent for the first 3 quarters of 2020 due to COVID. We brought them up online, so we now currently have 3 support groups online. We're about to have a 4th. And so these numbers are almost non-existent for last year, but we have a group for older adults. So it's 50 and above is our elder and I don't call that elder because I'm over that. So whatever. But we have a group for 50 and above. We have a sexual assault group, and we also have a domestic violence recovery group. And our 4th group coming up is for people in our shelter. And we had over 114 people, unique attendees of our support groups, and those are weekly groups, and so they provided over 500 support groups, almost 600 in the past or in the year 2019. We also provide a voice for our victims of crimes. We have legal advocates that can support people through court. If you look again, this is from 2019, but we had 763 clients who were represented in court. So we only have 2 legal advocates that go to court with people. So that says a little bit that what they do. They support them through their case. A lot of times we have civil advocates who will support them in filing a harassment restraining order or an order for protection. And that's the figure. There's 167 that filed with that. We do connect with with lawyers, not advocates. We connect with lawyers through the Order for Protection Project, and we had 63 people who got free lawyers to represent them through that process also. Let's see. Yeah, that's all that is. Sorry. So we recently had to disband our follow-up services. We had a separate program where we'd follow up with clients in the community. We now do have our shelter advocates doing that, so that process is still going on. So anytime someone comes to stay in the shelter and they move out into the community, we do have advocates that do follow-up, and that's anywhere from a month to a year. And then our on-call hospital advocacy is a great program. And this is honestly is going to be where we run into the most people that have been trafficked or exploited or are at risk of that. Anytime at the Mercy campuses for Mercy and Unity hospitals, if there is someone that comes in with domestic violence or sexual violence or trafficking, they will be seen by a sexual assault nurse examiner who in turn connects with us. And we have an advocate who meets with them and talks to them about our services, offers them support, gets them to shelter, or gets them any of the immediate needs that they have. Now, again, due to COVID, we used to go in person and support this person so we could be there through the exam and everything. And we haven't been able to do that. So throughout 2020, we talked to them on the phone, and that sucked. Starting in the end of January of this year, we just started doing telehealth with the 2 hospitals. So when they have a sexual assault or domestic assault or trafficking victim who they want to be seen by an advocate, we now do that by telehealth, which is like Zoom, and it's been working amazingly. The first 3, the people were on with them for over an hour, so we know that they were being supported and offered the resources and support they needed. Another unique program that we have is our aging services. I kind of touched on that for a second. Our 24-hour support line supports anyone who wants to call. Aging Our aging services are unique because anyone over the age of 50 that we work with, it doesn't have to be someone that is an intimate partner per se. Like when we're working with domestic violence, that has to be intimate partner. When it's sexual violence, that's anybody, it can be a stranger, it can be someone not know, whatever. Trafficking is the same thing, that you can be trafficked by a family member or an acquaintance or anything, and we'll work with them. But with the aging, it can be a child that's doing it, or a caregiver, because the abuse can be financial, or it can be emotional. It can be many more types of abuse than just the physical or emotional abuse that we work with domestic violence. And we can offer them shelter. We do have the support group for them, and we actually do have a specific advocate who works one-on-one with the aging population. And we also, at our community office, do have our youth services program. I could say it for every single program. They're also heavily affected by COVID. What they normally do pre-COVID, and hopefully coming up soon again, is they're heavily based in the schools and at the Lionel Juvenile Facility. They do one-on-one with kids who want to talk about any sort of abuse or anything going on. They do weekly groups at all the locations, and they also do like wider based presentations and learning sessions. They're just starting to get everything back on track again after last year. And um, a lot of their presence right now is on social media. So they've been doing they do a daily post on Instagram, and a lot of the kids have been working on it with them. But they also have started a few different Zoom groups with kids in different schools. They're slowly working back into the schools, and I'm really hoping that they do, because we want to get to the youth, because those are the ones that that we've been talking about with the trafficking. Um, because if you look, like in 2019, they touched the lives of over 1,700 kids. It was their work is great. So hopefully we'll get them back up in the schools soon. And then the other resource we have is our community education and professional training. We have a speakers bureau that comprises of staff. We have volunteers. We have former clients that all will go out and do presentations. And hopefully, again, we'll get back on track with those, because we presented to well over 6,000 people a couple of years ago. And then we do have volunteer opportunities that are just starting to get back on track. You can be a shelter advocate. You can do the hospital on calls with us. We do childcare for the families in the shelter, and then other opportunities. And then there's just some of our different social media, if you want to follow it. And then I have our 24-hour crisis line and our website if anyone wants to look up or has any more questions. And then also, I'll, of course, stick around on here to see if anyone has any questions. But that's all I got.
Thank you, Heidi. You had mentioned in our conversations that you might have a training coming up for the public to attend. Can you go into that a little bit?
I did, and I apologize that I totally brain freeze that. We do actually have our volunteer training coming up. It's an amazing training. It's about 45 hours, and it's learning all the ropes about sexual violence, domestic violence, trafficking. It covers so much more than that. It's about a 4-week training, and it's of no cost for anybody. And our volunteers, it's required for them to go through it, but everybody's welcome to it. And you can look at that on our website at alexanderhouse.org. The training is coming up. It starts, I believe, at the beginning of April, and it'll be a couple nights a week, and then I think there's one Saturday, and it goes for about 4 to 5 weeks. And one of the great things, Detective Shanton, they come and talk to us about what the sheriff's office does in their work with us too. So it's really good.
Thank you, Heidi. And we'll share that information as well when we post this training. Or if you have any questions, please reach out to us or Heidi. or anyone in the Multicultural Advisory Committee. So next we'll go to Laura Newton, one of our MAC members, and she's also the Family Service Program Director for the Minneapolis American Indian Center, and I'll give her the floor.
Bonjour, my name is Laura Newton, and I am a Family Services Program Director at the Minneapolis American Indian Center. I've worked there for about 16 years, and I work primarily with families involved in Indian child welfare, but I also supervise a program called the Indigenous Women's Life Net. The Indigenous Women's Life Net programs, we have two case managers, and those two case managers actually focus on working with victims of sexual assault, sex trafficking, and domestic violence. So I am aware of some of the resources and things available to our American Indian community. And I'm a member of the Multicultural Advisory Council here in Columbia Heights. So thank you for letting me present today. I do have some information that I'm going to be sharing. I'm trying to share it on my screen now, but it's not letting me. But I do have some information that I'm going to be sharing more through Justin to be able to get out some contact information. I guess one of the things that I'd like to talk about today is just from the cultural perspective, working with American Indian women and folks in our community. So, across the state of Minnesota, one of the things that is of high concern is that although the American Indian population here in Minnesota is relatively small, not more than like 2%, we actually have some of the highest rates of sex trafficking among American Indian women. There was a report done in about 2015 in Hennepin County where about 25% of the arrests for prostitution were American Indian women. Um, and they only make up about 1% of the population. So you can see and understand how there is an extreme disparity there. Having worked in the field of child welfare for many years, I also know and recognize and have been to many different presentations about some of the things that really impact our American Indian youth and individuals within the larger Minnesota community, but also the metro area. Um, One of those things is that I guess is a risk factor is youth that are coming from the foster care system. So being someone that has worked in social services and as a social worker with youth that are exiting the foster care system or involved in the foster care system, I know that this is something that makes youth particularly vulnerable to pimps and to other folks that might, try to prey on them. And so that's just one thing I wanted to, I guess, bring forward. I did hear a couple of times that was discussed. And I think I just wanted to bring that forth as a community issue um, because it is an issue in the American Indian community, but it's also a larger issue and in an area of concern um, for anyone who might be sex trafficked. As an earlier speaker pointed out, one of the things that is hard is youth that are vulnerable um, can oftentimes be taken in by different folks that are really trying to groom them or trying to prey on them and it might be partially because they maybe don't have a lot of family to go to. It might be because they have had a prior experience where they have been a victim of sexual assault themselves or sexual abuse. A lot of different things can go into that. I wanted to share with you, and maybe what I'll try to do, even while we're having questions, I do have a list of resources, but I feel bad because I can't get this to work right now. And it's probably because I'm on my phone. But what some of the different organizations that really, I think, do a wonderful job at working in it and with our American Indian community are the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center. The Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center really was on the forefront of this issue of sex trafficking with American Indian women, back into the early 2000s. There is a wonderful report, which, like I said, I'll be including if anybody wants to read it. It's both wonderful and very devastating. But it was done in about 2009. It's called Shattered Hearts, and it was a study of many American Indian women who had been involved in sex trafficking, and it kind of tells a little bit about their stories, how they came to be involved in sex trafficking, some of their history, and the number of women that were involved in kind of the prevalence of the issue within the American Indian community. There was another report that was done that is really interesting to look at, and the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition does a really great training. It's a wonderful thing. I think they do training for police. They do training for tribal communities, for social services, lots of different folks. And they're actually tasked with providing the federal technical assistance and training for American Indian sex trafficking. So it's another really great resource and organization. Both of these two organizations are located in Minneapolis. They both do also, besides providing training and presentations, they also provide services to survivors. And they do a lot to help um, women, and men if they want to get out of sex trafficking, or if they need resources or they need help or they have questions, any of those things. The Minneapolis American Indian Center, where I work, we have a program that is culturally responsive. We have two outreach case managers. We do go out to the metro area counties, and that is the case with many of the American Indian organizations. So, although they may be housed and located within Hennepin County, a lot of times our grants and the different funding sources that we have allows us to work with individuals, in the metro area. So not just in Minneapolis, but in Anoka County or in Ramsey County. One of the reasons we do that is because our American Indian population is more more transient. They move around more, and that is because of affordable housing and shelter and lots of different reasons. There's also you know folks, like I said, sometimes will be living somewhere for a short time with family, and then they will move back into Hennepin County. And so, a lot of times we have outreach workers that are going all over the metro area. So anyone who's interested, like I said, I'm going to make sure we share that information, and then, would appreciate if anyone has any questions, can certainly ask me. I guess really quickly, and I know we've kind of run long on time, so I don't want to spend a longer amount of time. There's so much to say about this issue. I guess what I would say as an Ojibwe person and a woman who has worked in this field for a long time, um, one of the things that we see with American Indian families and with youth that have been sex trafficked, and just the prevalence that happens within our community, really has to do with some of the policies that have been put into place for many, many years by the United States and the federal government, in which, many of our families started off, um, for lack of a better word, but, with in poor circumstances, and in which they were forced onto reservations, in which families were, through federal legislation, were forced into they were forced into assimilating in different ways through boarding school, separation from their families. There's been, a few different ways which American Indian families were broken apart, um, as part of federal legislation. And so we really see this as a issue that has kind of come down through colonization, and it's something that is taken very seriously, and people are always really working towards trying to find ways for people to heal and to get out of those situations. One of the other things I would maybe point out is, because there is such a high prevalence, there it's very likely, even though, Anoka County's American Indian population might also not be very high. It's very likely that we will have American Indian women, especially young girls, coming into some of the properties that are in Anoka County, such as the hotels and stuff, simply because it's one of the areas where traffickers are bringing women. Um, and so I would just, encourage folks to reach out to these cultural resources. I'm so glad that Columbia Heights has such a great relationship with Alexander House. I know that you all have been on a couple of our MAC meetings, and I know that you all do such wonderful work. But even, other social service organizations, I just encourage them to reach out to the resources I'm going to provide, only because I think that one of the unique things with working with American Indian women is that they do generally tend to work well with other American Indian professionals, and it can be a really hard population to get to talk to someone. They can be very, I guess, timid to talk to any authority figures, um, and so it's certainly something that I know each of these organizations are always willing to branch out and work together with others to help that happen. So that being said, I think that's all I have, and I know we want to have lots of time for questions left. So I think that's what I have for now, and I'll provide the PowerPoint that I did have to Justin so that that can get sent out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And before we get to our final speaker, I just want to remind everybody that Laura was really the brainchild of this whole public forum. It was really her idea as a part of our meetings with the MAC. So I want to thank her again for bringing this to the forefront. And obviously Rachel and her really helped put this together. But finally, Bukala Oriola of the Ennington story. The floor is yours. And do you want to share your screen or want me to share it?
You can share it. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, that's not the one. I think, let me share. That's not the one. Sorry, let me share. Okay. Because I just have one page. Since I'm going to be talking about our work and how we help in the community. Thank you everyone for having me here tonight. The Ennington story was started in 2013. And the reason why we started the organization was because of myself and my son. After experiencing domestic violence and labor trafficking in Ramsey, Minnesota, the city of Ramsey, Minnesota, and getting help, I decided to take the first step of putting my face to my story by doing a book. And after doing the book, I did a TV show, and I'm glad that the Anoka County Sheriff's Office is represented here tonight because the sheriff was on the show to educate the community about human trafficking. And it was in that process that people were reaching out for help. And as people were reaching out for help, I quickly realized that a lot of those who are coming to me for help were from the immigrant population, especially the African immigrant population in Minnesota and outside of Minnesota. And while they were coming for help, I also identified some gaps in the services that are already being provided. So I decided to work with some other community members, and we founded the Ellington Story in 2013. So Ellington Story hasn't been around for long, so you can regard us as the toddler on the block, still on the breast milk. Eniton is pronounced Eniton. For those who are not familiar with the word, it's a Yoruba word, and it's actually a name. It means someone with a story. And the reason we use that name is so that victims and survivors can know that we understand and we operate from a survivor-informed perspective, knowing that the organization was founded by someone who has gone through similar experience with them. And that is why the mission of the organization is to advocate for victims and empower survivors of human trafficking and domestic violence. And when we say human trafficking, we also mean sex and labor trafficking. As an organization that is survivor-led, we do not do disparity. We treat everyone equal, and we treat every victim or survivor that come in contact with us the same as everyone. So we do a lot of outreach. So this is like outreach for us right now. And tonight we are here thanks to grants actually from the Minnesota Department of Health. The Eniton Story is a safe harbor supportive services program provider where we provide case management to victims and survivors of sex trafficking. But in this case, we only serve youth up to the age of 24. If we have someone come through who is older, we have to refer them to other services. We also serve victims of labor trafficking, which right now we do not have specific grants to do direct services to victims of labor trafficking. So we also look out for help for kinds of people. We still do case management with them. One of the things we do when doing case management, because most of the people we are serving don't know the American culture. They don't understand the American culture, and different people keep telling them different things. They are confused, they are scared, they don't know how to talk to law enforcement. In fact, just last night, I had somebody call me who was so scared of the police. And I had to say to her, okay, come, go to the door and greet the police. Don't be afraid. And I've had instances where I had to personally drive clients to the police department or to the BCA for interviewing. Why? Because they need that support. They need that trust. It's very hard when you're not familiar with the system or you're not familiar with the culture. And if you do not have good relationship with the police from your home country, it will really be difficult for you to believe that the police is for you in a foreign country. So they need a provider who understands that to work with them as they try to receive services. Sometimes we come across clients through other organizations where they're already receiving services, but in the process of receiving services, they are still having other needs. Sometimes the need they have is very, very basic, but there is no one, even with the amount of resources available, to provide it to them. Why? Because Even in service provision, there are lots of restrictions. Sometimes it is the grantor who has restricted the grants to certain kinds of people or certain age group. And when other people with the same kind of needs show up, it's hard for them to get help. So we really help to navigate the system and really help them to find help through different agencies and through different groups. Sometimes some of the help is immigration. We do not have immigration lawyers because we do not do immigration law, but we help connect our clients to providers who are doing immigration services for those who are foreign nationals. And another thing too for us is that because our clientele have different culture, there are so many nuances. Even when they're telling you their story or when they are explaining things to you, they don't have an understanding of this is what this means. So a recent example I can give is two clients we had. One of them, we were in a Zoom meeting for her case. They are family, but we do different meetings. So when a Zoom meeting with her for her case, and then the other family member, we had to now meet the two of them together. So I asked the one, oh, so did this person tell you we had the meeting? She said, yes. She said, yes. She said, you had the meeting on the phone. And I said, we didn't have the phone. So I asked the other person, did you tell her we had the meeting? She said, yes. I said, how did you have the meeting? She said, via Zoom. So you see, even though somebody is using their Zoom or doing Zoom meeting via phone, Zoom meeting and telephone call are two different things. But that person didn't understand it that way. And that is one of the things that pose challenges when we are serving people from other countries. And as a result of that, we eliminate those that we need to be helping. So we help other providers to understand this, to be able to provide, adequate services to those in need of help. Another thing we do is the job and life skills for either traditional job or entrepreneurship. Sometimes those we're working with are not interested in going to get a traditional job. And sometimes, excuse me, they may be interested in getting a traditional job, but they're not able to keep that job because of the post-traumatic stress disorder they are experiencing. Sometimes it's what somebody will say at the job that will trigger their lived experience. Sometimes it's something unrelated that will trigger their lived experience, and as a result, break down at work, can't work. And America, it's like a machine, I say, because it's a place where it's the first place I had no work or no show you are at, meaning you don't call, you didn't show, meaning forget about your job. That means your job is done. From where I come, if you do not show the first day, they will be like, oh, maybe, something happened. We hear from this person, we didn't hear. The next day, we will check on the person. 1 week, we're still checking to see, oh, is everything okay? Who can we contact? Who knows this person? Can we go to the person's house to make sure they're okay? What is the problem? And sometimes the person has just quit and gone and they don't want to come back. But sometimes that's where we find out that something really bad has happened and the person needs help. I've seen the US here where somebody was sick, really sick and had to do surgery, dying at the hospital, and the employer is sending letter home to the person saying, if we don't see you show up at your work by so day, consider your job gone. That's two different cultures. And how do you help someone to navigate that? So because of that, we focus on social entrepreneurship also to help our clients. If they can't keep the traditional job, we help them see how they can do something with their hands, how they can do something where they're the one controlling it 100%. Where if they feel like, oh, today I feel so depressed, I won't get up from my bed, there will not be the added layer of, oh, you don't show up, you lose the job, or you lose the job, there is nothing more for you, and then you're back to square one. And COVID helped us to see one of the challenges that our clients experience. We have our empowerment circle once a month with clients. It's not exactly a support group. It's kind of a place where we talk about your goals, your challenges. What is stopping you from meeting that goals? What is the next thing you want to do? Where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself? To kind of guide them through. And then COVID helped us to find out that our clients were lacking basic needs. Because when COVID broke out last year, one of the things we did was that we did survey. And in surveying our clients, we realized that even those with kids, for example, are so frustrated that they're going to book food banks for food and they're getting expired food. And they're going hungry with children who are toddlers. You can imagine a mother going to a food bank to get food and getting home and finding out that the baby food she was given had expired. That is really hard. And also, some of the people we serve do not have their legal status. So as a result, or the legal status they have cannot get them any kind of government benefit. So when they can't get government benefit, they can't get food stamp, where do they go to? It's the food bank. And they're going there, and some of those places are giving people expired food. That was one thing we found out, and we're able to get a little funding to provide basic little food to our clients. Also, we introduced what we call the gratitude support group. And the gratitude support group, we host it every week where they come together virtually on Zoom to talk about what they're grateful for in order to help keep their mind away from the stress they're experiencing as a result of the pandemic, the stress they are experiencing as a result of their own case that they're still navigating through the system, the stress they're going through with mental health. And it's been very, very rewarding that we started that. And we realized that they were always looking forward to coming to support group every Friday, because we do it every Friday. They were always looking forward to coming to the support group. And just recently, we got help to expand it further to bring in, because it's almost like, what do you call it? Like, it's not clinical, kind of like therapy, but it's not, we don't call it therapy because it is not, it's support group. But also we're able to get help now to bring in 2 professional cultural healers to help our clients during the weekly support group. And in terms of outreach, we've reached over 20,000 households in the state of Minnesota, because we serve people across the state and even outside of the borders of Minnesota, because we do have people who call from other states and other countries sometimes. And also because of our work, which is global, we have also reached over 2 million people around the world. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now I'm going to give the floor to Rachel. She'll be our question asker. So go ahead, Rachel. Let us know what you got.
Thank you. I am so thankful to hear your story, Bukola, and thank you for sharing your organization. Thank you, Laura, for the resources that you've provided in the chat and numbers, and for sharing the work that you're doing. And Heidi with the Alexander House, we are so thankful for you. and what you're doing. And thank you to Detective from the BCA, Shanson. I'm not sure how to say your last name, but Shanson. There we go. Got it. Thank you, community members, for coming. Please send me your questions in the chat. You can send it to me private message or to the group. I assume that you're all here tonight because you care about this issue in our community. As we've heard, this is happening in Anoka County. This is happening in Minneapolis and Columbia Heights and probably nearby where we live. The Multicultural Advisory Committee of the Police Department, we care about this issue because our children live here, our family members, our neighbors, our community members are impacted. And we've heard that some of the causes of this issue are multifaceted. So the first question that we got was actually for our first speaker, and it was for those officers and others who are working in this field, do you receive any special mental health therapy or training to help them in such a terrible, difficult thing to work with? So I'll give that to Detective Shanson.
Yeah, so actually we're in the process in Anoka County right now of like a mental health wellness program that they actually say they're going to roll out. So our detectives, deputies, people that are dealing with victims, gruesome scenes, things like that. We'll start where they can meet with a psychologist. I think it's twice a year. This has just kind of come to light recently, and we've had actually in our office and really throughout law enforcement a lot of people that have been going out with mental health issues or PTSD, just from the things they're witnessing or experiencing. So we identified that a while ago in our office that there's something we need to do, and I know a group from our office had gotten together and I think working with others in the county. So I know we were just told that that was going to be rolling out, and I know a lot of other agencies do already do things like that. So we're just a little behind the curve probably.
Thank you for that answer. And we support mental health with our officers here in Columbia Heights, I know. So we thank you. This is a question for, I'll start with Heidi, is the question was sent in as a kind of a, what's the success rate of getting victims out of the cycle? But if you have an answer for how do you help people that come in contact with Alexander House? And then if any of the other speakers wanted to jump in.
Okay. Well, I don't know how to gauge that, because to me, anytime that we have a connection with a victim and they know that there's someone there, I feel that that's a success. A lot of times when either law enforcement or the navigator who works with the youth in our area, when they reach out and ask me to talk to somebody, a lot of times it's just to give them a little space to vent and to ask questions or anything like that. A lot of not a lot of times. Sometimes they're looking for a safe place to go, so we'll get them to our shelter. And we've had very mixed results at shelter. Sometimes someone will stay for a couple months and get back on their feet, and sometimes they'll stay for the night just to have a nice warm bed and an actual place to sleep for the night and then go. But both of those to me are a success, because that's one night they weren't on the street, one night they weren't being, exploited or trafficked. When we're working with law enforcement on the stings, it hasn't been too huge. I mean, I'll talk to each person that they rescue from those missions and offer them, not just us, because I mean we're just one small organization. I'll give them every resource I can, and so hopefully they're reaching out in other places, but not. It hasn't been too often that we've had someone come to shelter from there, but I have received calls from there, and I know that I'm not the only person, or like the what's the word, like the one person that works with survivors. So I'll get them connected to everyone I can. I always give out Bucola's name. I give out law enforcement's name. If they're younger than 25, I get them connected to some of the other shelters that work with under 25 that is specific to trafficking. And so, we have a great shelter in St. Cloud called Terebinth Refuge, where I've sent quite a few people to. So I don't have any number for that.
Thank you for sharing that, Heidi. I do agree that the success rate is is letting them know you're there, and that's really wonderful. I got 3 or 4 more questions. The next one I will give this to whoever feels like they have an answer for it, which is, what are some things that citizens could be looking for, signs that we should be aware of to help get people services or to report?
I can jump on that first. I know that other people will probably have very different things. When I was working in, I actually worked for a while in Hennepin County in the Bloomington area and a couple of the suburbs, and I had presented at a church, and they had some really good ideas about what they were looking for. I had a woman who said there was a house on her road, an average road, and there was a bunch of kids coming in and out of the house after, right after school. And she said, I know that they didn't have any kids living in this house, so I didn't know what to do. What do you think I should do? And I said, well, call the call your local law enforcement, have them try to check out what's going on. And it honestly ended up being a house where they were grooming kids to be trafficked. I mean, it's not as easy as that. It's not, I've never had it, not easy, but never as blatant as that. But, I always tell people, and I know every time I see a presentation at the sheriff's office too, they say, if you see something, say something. Anything that looks out of the ordinary. If there's, kids hanging out somewhere that they shouldn't be, or if you see, like, I had a friend of mine call from Northtown Mall because an adult woman was going up to kids asking them about God, and it wasn't a godly person because they actually had a van sitting outside, so at anytime you think you have anything out of the ordinary, call 911. That's why they're here.
Thank you, Heidi. I saw Laura. Did you have something to add to that answer?
Um, I think Miss Meisner, do you have something that you wanted to say? I don't have anything specific.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, I thank you. I was just going to jump in, and Detective Sanchin kind of mentioned that sometimes these sex trafficking opportunities happen right in plain daylight, right in the public arena. And this is all about kind of both education and awareness on our parts as far as citizens, and then whatever our comfort level is. Obviously, calling law enforcement directly if you kind of think something is going on. But I know that I've been told stories where, let's say in a restaurant, and especially women, I think we have that gut reaction sometimes, that sixth sense. And, if there's a situation where you're kind of looking at something that doesn't seem right, I've heard stories where, they'll wait for these young women to go into the women's restroom, and they'll make sure that, as a citizen, they'll follow, and they'll just say, hey, is everything okay? I just want to make sure that you're okay. And that can literally be the only question that they ask them, and kind of see where that goes. Again, I just want to stress that this is obviously the comfort level of each person. But I have been told stories like this where it has happened that, sometimes these young women will say, oh my gosh, thank you so much, because I'm not sure what to do. And in that point, most people have a cell phone. Then you can call law enforcement, you can call, actual professional help for that. But sometimes if you just ask in the moment, that can be the night and day difference between helping a victim.
I would like to add.
Yes, thank you, Bukola.
I would like to add that, from a survivor's perspective, sometimes calling the law enforcement right away is not helping the victim. I know we have the police here tonight, with all due respect. Sometimes you just need to call a local organization so that an advocate will walk the walk with that victim to work with the police or law enforcement. I said in my presentation that I actually drove clients to police department to be interviewed. I drove clients to the BCA to be interviewed, because I know law enforcement is critical in the process. But sometimes, if you call law enforcement right away, except you see that there is fire on the mountain right now, where they need to come out to call that 911. If you don't see that right now, call a local organization and get an advocate, work with them to call 911 or drive them to the police department to help the clients, because there are what they call unintended consequences. Even as an advocate, that still happens when you're trying to work with clients. How much more the general public? And in honesty, sometimes it may not even look like what we're looking for. And it will be a victim in front of you. Either it's a victim of labor trafficking or it's a victim of sex trafficking. And sometimes the victim is experiencing both at the same time, or the victim is experiencing domestic violence and labor trafficking, or domestic violence and sex trafficking. So what I will say is pay attention. Don't ignore anybody. When you see something, like they say, see something, say something. Pay more attention. Just recently, somebody sent me a news article of an incident at the restaurant. This child was with the family, and the waitress noticed how they were treating that child. And the waitress wrote on a piece of paper to the child, "Do you need help? Are you okay?" And that was how that child was able to get help. If the waitress had called 911, that family, once they say, "Oh, police is here, what's going on?" they will just leave and take that child with them. And if they've gone, how will you be able to trace them? So let's not just use one means. Let's look at, what does the situation look like? Does this situation look like I need to call police right now to save all of us here and this person? Or can I call an advocate to help us?
Thank you, Bukola. One specific thing that I wanted to share with everyone is that a direct action that you can do tonight is to save in your cell phone the phone numbers for the resources provided. Save the 24-hour line from the Alexandra House, save some of the resources that Laura shared, save some of the resources that Bukola shared, so that we can have those on hand. And then another thing that we can do, as was mentioned, is the people that we see as victims, we may not recognize them as a victim. So in any area where you have influence, I know where I work, we've posted information in the bathrooms at times to share with those, so that people can see information on how to resource. In any area where you have that opportunity, please make sure the resources are known. Another question that came up, and this can be for anyone who feels like they have a good answer, was when someone has a loved one who they feel is caught up in this situation and they're not sure they're ready for help, they haven't admitted they have a problem, what are some things that the loved ones can do when they're observing something like this?
Maybe real quick on this one. Actually, I'll kind of bounce back to the last one too. I'll say I actually do to somewhat extent agree with Bukola there. With you don't always have to call the cops. I'll quick just share here on my screen. This handout I think should be coming out as well. This is one that we usually give out to people working with kids that has a few the at-risk populations, signs of being trafficked, some things like that. So I just wanted to let people know that's out there as well. And some of these things, as far as the signs, again, it's not a catch-all, but that might be something that parents or other family members or friends are seeing that might identify, or concerns about trafficking. I think for me the biggest thing would be to, number one, talk to them about your concerns, give them a chance to disclose, maybe ask for help. I do agree that a lot of times that going to an advocate or a service provider is good. If they're not willing and they're not ready to share their experience with law enforcement, they might want to get out of this lifestyle, but don't want a criminal investigation. We don't want to force that. The one caveat is if it's a child involved, it does become a child welfare type matter that either us or child protection have to get involved in. But if it's somebody who's an adult, I mean, they have a choice on whether or not they want to proceed. If they want a criminal investigation, they want law enforcement involved. Um, so I think talking to them, seeing, what they'll, disclose, and if there is a way, that you can support them, you can help them, whether it's reaching out to an organization or maybe just being that person there to support them, help them get out of the lifestyle. I think that's the biggest thing. And, for us, I mean, if it does come to a point of a criminal investigation, I mean, having some documentation, what they're seeing, always helps. I've had parents come to me where we haven't been able to have a child talk to us, but they'll talk about the different men that we're dropping them off, who these friends are that they're hanging out with, social media accounts they've been using that, if it becomes something that law enforcement can be involved in, that we have somewhere to go to build the case later on as well. So a lot of times it's the family, the friends, the parents that have been big in trying to help us build these cases because we'd like to build them without the victim. We don't like to have situations like I talked about in the case where this victim had to testify that really set them back. We'd build it with all the other whether it's electronic evidence, text messages, other surrounding witness statements, rather than have to use the victim. So um, yeah, I think that's all. Probably just leave it at that. If anybody else has anything more to share.
Thank
Um,
you.
Can I add something more?
Laura,
I think
yes.
that in talking with, family members, I think one of the most important things that you can do is just, you know, recognizing that they might not be ready to see this as a problem yet, especially if you're working with a young person who maybe has been groomed into this, is newer into being trafficked, is maybe still referring to um individuals as like a boyfriend or for some youth especially, or young women, I think it can be really difficult for them at first to really see what's happening. um and so sometimes it is about just listening, and just listening to that person, and just finding out more about the situation. There definitely are, like other people have said today, there are always, especially for kids, there are other resources as far as like things that can be reported if it's maybe not something they're quite ready to talk about themselves, or maybe they just share with you but not with anyone else. Then there's ways to report those things. I think the other thing, it is just helpful to have people know that you're there to listen to them. Um, the other thing I was going to add is that I think for community members to be aware of, just in general, I think anyone in the community that knows kids, has their own kids, grandkids, anything like that, I think it's just really, really important that people talk to kids. Um, you know, so many people are sex trafficked, before they're 18 years old. And, I think it's really important that parents and grandparents and relatives have conversations with the kids in their lives, just about what is sex trafficking, what is sexual abuse, um, what to kind of look out for on social media, have social media guidelines for youth, and ways to check up, because it's unfortunately it's really easy for kids to to just talk to someone on a game or something like that, that presents themselves as a young person. One thing nobody really touched on here, but in working with a lot of women and girls, um, one thing that sometimes happens is, pimps and those kind of folks are not always the first point of contact for young women. A lot of times it's another young woman, and that might do some grooming and kind of introduce them to a man and do some of those things. And I think that um, just being really aware of like who are the kids' friends, and who are they talking to, and how old those people are. Um, and and just really just hammering in like it's not safe to meet people that you just have met on social media. That's the biggest thing I see with working with youth, is that that's the piece that really is hard, is just kind of talking to them about like it's you can't just go make 20 friends on Snapchat or whatever, and then just go ahead and just meet them, and you don't know anything about them. So just reiterating like safety issues with youth, and whether that be youth that from a rec program, or your own kids, or whoever. I think any community member can do that just by being caring about kids and talking to them about those things.
Thank
That's
you,
all I have.
Laura. Thanks. Another question that we received via the chat was a comfort private chat, was that there is stories in the news media and online blogs kind of around conspiracy theories of child sex trafficking rings and other crazy things like cannibalism, etc. And so how do folks that are listening and watching the replay find the real information versus what might be a conspiracy theory or hoax, and know how to respond? Detective Shanson, do you know anything about how they're the message was about what they've heard about, like sending kids away from the state into Hollywood or Texas or somewhere else. Is that something that you deal with a lot in Anoka County, Minnesota?
It's not. I know there's tons of stuff like these conspiracies that are out there. I mean, there are some of our girls or juveniles that do end up out of state, but for what we see on a daily basis, it's really the domestic and local trafficking. I mean, for example, I had a case that was actually out of Coon Rapids where these girls were trafficked in South Minneapolis. They'd get picked up outside of their school by a trafficker, brought down, trafficked, and then by like midnight they were back home. I mean, so we're seeing a lot of this. People have these thoughts of child sex trafficking, of kids being kidnapped and whisked away, and I mean that's not by and large what we see. And I mean they do such a good job of controlling them, that again, I mean they can traffic them after school and send them home, and they'll be back and they'll do it the next day. Again, they think this is their boyfriend or they need to do this or things like that. So yeah, I'd say most of that is not something that we're seeing at all.
Say, Rachel.
Yes.
Yeah, if I could just comment on that as well, just follow up with what Mike just said. When it comes to a lot of things like this, and especially when it comes to criminal investigations or criminal matters, there is a lot of misinformation that gets out there. And all I would ask is to direct anyone to any state resources. For example, the Department of Public Safety. If you just Google Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force, it'll actually take you to the Department of Public Safety, and there's some really good information there with statistics and information on trafficking. Just as one example, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, obviously, but some of the bigger, more the validated ones, I would always point to that direction. Like I said, that is we're from a law enforcement perspective, we're dealing with that misinformation constantly as well, and so just some of it is a little out there. There's no question, but I would just try to focus in on some of those more localized sites, the state, the FBI, those types of websites. I think you can get a lot of really good, accurate information as well as tips to help combat that and spot these types of things.
Thank you, Chief. All of us that are on the call have an important job to share this information that we've learned tonight, and to share these sources about where to find the correct information and to help combat misinformation, and also to share the good work of our speakers and all the great organizations that are out there. I heard Bukola mention and Heidi mentioned that people don't always know what resources are out there. And so tonight we get a chance to bring that message to our communities. I have no other questions that have been submitted. I did see one final question from Valerie that I wanted to just end the night on and to thank everyone, which is what can our communities do in general to help create safer communities where there is less human trafficking? If anyone had a thought they'd like to share on what can our community do, preventative or reactive, to help.
If I may respond to that, I think that one of those things you can do is what you are doing right now. So thank you for attending an event like this. I say that one of the ways that we can eradicate trafficking completely is education. Some people think, oh, it's so prevalent in this area more than this area. But what has actually happened is that we are doing more education and awareness, and more people are now knowing about it. Things that have been there. When I was looking at Detective Mike's slide, he wrote, hidden in plain sight. It's hidden in plain sight, but because now we are educating about it, we are knowing more about it. So education is key. Attend events like this. You too, host an event like this. Don't leave it to just the police department to host this kind of event. Host an event like this, and thank God for Zoom now. That's one of the good things that COVID brought. So you can invite all your friends who cannot travel down to your house. They join on Zoom and learn about this. Thank you.
I totally agree with Bukola that because I've listened to her talk many times and I learn something new every single time. And whatever I learn, I share with others. And that's the other thing is once we do this, not to just take take this lesson and sit on it, is to share it with others and to continue to talk about it so it doesn't fall by the wayside. And utilize all those resources. And if you can't find a resource, call one of us to get that resource, because that's my favorite part of the job is if I can't figure something out is to call people until I can. And so I just a matter of keep talking about it, keep sharing, and keep doing what we're doing right now.
I would agree with both of you as well. I mean, education is huge. Making sure that everybody in our community knows about it. Most importantly, with our youth, that they know what trafficking is, what the traffickers' tactics are, for the victim side of things, but then also, to show the boys growing up that, as far as sex trafficking, that buying sex is not okay, raising a generation where this is not okay, and, even out in the community to show, those that are willing to buy sex that this is not accepted, this is not okay. Obviously, if we can keep shrinking the demand, we're going to shrink the problem in general. If there's not people there to buy, you're not going to have people willing to sell the victims. So I think just keep spreading the word, keep educating people, and if you see it going on, trying to help the victims, or let law enforcement know if you see anything suspicious.
Thank you, speakers, and thank you, guests. I wanted to mention that all of the resources that are put in this chat will be put into a document and are attached to the replay when the video is posted. Also on Zoom, there's a function at the bottom of the chat where there's 3 little dots where you can click that and it will help you download or save the chat on your computer. So if you missed any of the phone numbers or details and you want them for tonight or before the video is ready for the replay, you can have that there. I want to thank everyone for coming and to invite you, once the video is posted, to share it in your resources. If anyone has any other final questions, please feel free to contact the Columbia Heights Police Department. We thank Sergeant Pletcher for organizing the technical side and all of the speakers. Yay, Sergeant Pletcher. And we invite you to continue to be in contact with all of us. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for
Before I
participating.
give it to the chief to say goodnight, as well as the great thing about this is we're working together, right? Public safety, sex trafficking is not a single organization. We have to fight it together. So bringing Bukola and Alexander House and Laura and all of us together, we understand that we are a community working these problems together. So thank you for coming, and Chief, I'll let you say goodnight.
Yep, and I'll be very brief. Just thank you, everyone. It was a much larger turnout than we expected, so thank you for all of that. And as always, if you have any follow-up questions for either Justin or I, please feel free to reach out. We can usually get back to you fairly quickly. So thanks again, and just a special thanks to Mike Shanson from CID. I'm glad you're doing well, and thanks for your help on this.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate this.
All right, Justin, I'll let you go ahead and sign us all off then. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great night. Be safe out there.
Bye.